Hello, I'm back again, and this is the second part of Seminar 7, and I'm just going to highlight a few points from the PowerPoint, and I'm looking at slide 9. Just wanted to talk a bit about this concept, distorted development, and there is a quote on slide 9, and it's referring to this term distorted development, which refers to the disconnect or the imbalance or the severe difference that might exist within one particular country or one particular area, and particularly the imbalance between economic and social prosperity. And distorted development is something that we see particularly in very wealthy countries around the world, very wealthy countries like Australia, like America, like England, and increasingly this is also emerging in India, where on the one hand there is wealth and high standards of living, and on the other hand there is incredible poverty, and particularly in Australia, Aboriginal people in Australia do not share the equal amount of wealth and don't enjoy the same prosperity, don't enjoy the same standard of living and length of life as non-Aboriginal Australians do. So distorted development is a term that you might come across in your reading. And one of the things that we did in the class, in the seminar in Darwin, was as a group, people were thinking about, talking about that idea of distorted development. And so for external students too, I encourage you to think about, perhaps in Australia or perhaps globally, where there are differences that are very stark in one country or in one area that highlight this distorted development. And no doubt you will easily be able to come up with a number of examples that highlight that certain parts of the population don't enjoy the benefits that the rest of the population enjoys. And as a social worker, a humanitarian worker, a community worker, being aware of the economic, the political, and the social aspects that contribute to this inequality is a really important part of our work and our awareness, because it also will impact on the way that we approach working with different groups of people. I've got on slide 11 just a different approach, or putting in there Jim Ive, a quote from him around the role of community work and how social development links to community work. And this is saying that community work and community-based work focuses on processes of establishing or re-establishing structures of human community within which new ways of relating, organising social life and meeting human need becomes possible. When we talk about, in that quote, meeting human need, I like that because it highlights that in community work, community workers, social workers, humanitarian workers are also about addressing human need, and often that is around addressing disadvantage and around unequal access to wealth. And thinking particularly about international community work, there's still things, processes and practices around community work in a social development context that will apply. And you can probably think of some examples yourself about how this actually might work. Working with people, for example, in a displaced persons camp after a natural disaster or after civil war, what actually needs to happen for a community worker or a humanitarian worker to work effectively with people in that situation should involve addressing a whole range of needs that include social and economic needs. The next slide is just highlighting that a whole range of people are involved in this work. Different people from different backgrounds and sometimes also volunteers. Social development organisations are usually undertaken by non-government organisations such as the Red Cross, CARE and UNICEF. You will see these organisations all around the world doing social development, involved in social development, providing programs, also doing community work, doing a whole range of service delivery as well. When we're talking about social development and some of the problems around the terminology that has, as I said earlier, has often focused on looking at countries that are economically poorer, that are disadvantaged, that have often been referred to as developing or undeveloped. Be very aware of the power of the language, and these terms are now considered to be quite inappropriate and quite patronising, because in a way they are focusing on what that particular country doesn't have. So these terms are now no longer used. So as the case is now, the terminology and the associated theories and practices are becoming increasingly relevant to the social, economic, political and cultural conditions of people in what has been called developed areas who still experience poverty, social exclusion and injustice, often in spite of or because of high levels of economic growth. An example of that could also be in countries where there's been developments, and for example the Olympic Games are one such example, where to build a new stadium for the Olympics has resulted in a number of countries, people who are living in areas close to where the stadium needed to be built, such as in Beijing, are forcibly moved out. And so to have access to fabulously expensive games in the Olympic Games directly has impacted and affected those who are poorer and who are disadvantaged. And that highlights that Western models of welfare have often contributed to the entrenchment of disadvantage. And yet it's something that in mainstream culture, in white Australian culture, in the teaching of social work, that we need to be really wary of, and to really be thinking about how do we actually consider as a profession, as workers and as individuals, how does our work and our actions and our language contribute to creating barriers, or is it about contributing to challenging those barriers and assumptions and breaking them down? I'm just looking now at slide 16, and this is just another point about social development theory. It's just encouraging us to reimagine space, not as fixed or homogenous and innocent as was the case in many modernist political action theories, but as a contested, shifting, uncertain site of struggle, a site full of possibilities for resistance and radical openness. So in this approach, when we consider social development as part of community work, people are engaged as co-producers. and endeavours to enhance their welfare see them as active participants and see them as part of the process, as opposed to being recipients of welfare that's been designed by professionals or outsiders or experts. I think we've already talked about what some of the criticisms of social development are, and because it comes from a third worldist history with that focus on the countries that are disadvantaged or the countries that are developing, that language has reinforced oppressive and colonising views that have come in and said, this is what we think is best for you. This is what we think should happen to you. This happens on a macro level internationally. It can also happen on a meso level, and it can happen also on a micro level in the work that social workers and community workers and humanitarian workers do. So the idea of the Western experts coming into communities to tell other people how to deal with their issues is something that we're challenging and we're questioning, and community workers and humanitarian workers should be doing that every day in their role. When you have a look at the YouTube video by Ernesto Ciroli, we had a look at this in the class, and what I want to encourage you to do, because I think in some ways he makes the point better than I can, talking about some of these issues, talking about some of the problems of outside Western wealthy countries, NGOs coming into third world countries and telling them what's best for them. He makes some very good points, so I encourage you to have a look at that YouTube video and think about a couple of things that he raises. One thing that he raises is the community meeting, and how the community meeting isn't always the best way to engage everyone in a community. He uses the term entrepreneur in that talk, in that TED talk. If you're not familiar with entrepreneur, it's referring to a creative business person, put simply. So people who have ideas about starting up a business, and often these people are the people that don't come to meetings, and he will talk more about that. Also, he makes some other interesting points about the idea of the worker thinking about their role in a way that places them in a servant role. And one of the things we're struggling with in our study and doing this course and coming to university is that we're acquiring knowledge and getting information, but at the same time we're actually challenging the whole role of experts. And he suggests the term servant, and one of the key things around a servant is that they need to listen, and it's something that is really important in this work. So I encourage you to have a look at it and reflect on that. Bye.